Okay, great. So let's get started. Welcome to the first part of this two-session section, right? So I will discuss a little bit of FHIR in the enterprise, how we see it as SAP, what we are trying to achieve, what are our challenges, what we have to use FHIR there, and also why we are still very deep in love with FHIR. So myself, I am Unewisse. I'm a chief architect in SAP Health, so my background is partner and extensibility enablement. So my task is to find out on the technology level what can we do that our partner ecosystem can really use our tools to build a win-win situation for us and the partners itself. So how simply they can use it, how simply can customers consume partner extension. So I'm legally obliged to show these things. Everything what I'm showing here today is very, very forward-looking, right? So therefore, it can't be a product pitch because there's not yet a product out what you could buy from the things what I'm talking. Please, everything what we see here is not a commitment to a roadmap. As well, don't take any buying decisions on what you have seen. Now I'm on the legal safe side for myself, and we can go to the real stuff, right? So what I would like to achieve today is getting a little bit of context. What is SAP doing in the healthcare industry so far? Maybe some of you already have used some of our products there, right? And how we want to evolve there, and how we can, and using FHIR, and then going a little bit in some of the areas, which is more broader interest, I guess, also for the people here in the audience. Right, so our current main product in the healthcare section is ISH. I'm not sure. Does someone has heard about SAP ISH already? Right, so thank you very much. So that is a product, and it started in 1995. So it's really, really a legacy product, what we'll hear later on about how to deal with them, right? So, and in general, it's a complete industry solution for healthcare, right? There are parts like patient administration, patient accounting, so how you make invoices later on of your clinical services. This belongs to SAP. And on top of that is ISH Med, what at the moment belongs to Cerner Europe, right? That is a complete clinical system, mainly used in Europe, right? So, and this is a complete monolith, right? So therefore, the Cerner developers has direct access to our code base so that they can do their stuff. So that is the current state where we are developing in, right? Just to get you some numbers so that you get an impression of the size of this product. So we have 1,500 customers around the world. Right, so, and we are not in the US so far and have not achieved so far, but in general in Europe we are very, very strong. And you see it's a very huge product with 17 million lines of code, 10,000 tables and roughly 10,000 UI screens. Right, and after 25 years, we think it might be a good time to think about what could be the next generation of such a product look like. Right, and therefore we are targeting how can we get from a monolith like this to independent modules, right? So how can we decouple our elements? Today, for example, if there is a clinic that has a different healthcare information system than ISH Med, they still get the complete product from us, and they can't say, oh, I don't want this product, so as we are at the moment not able to achieve that. Based on overall movement into the cloud and SAP strategy, the idea is how can we bring all these independent modules also into the cloud? And as third, right, how can we make use of FHIR first for the interoperability, but we see later also for further things. Here, accounting, we will not use FHIR because that is then our legacy interfaces with our own ERP system, and it would not make sense to bring this system also to FHIR. Very early, we take two architecture decisions that we use not only FHIR for interoperability, but really everything what we will do, our systems will only speak FHIR, right? So all things what we are doing also in our internal logic will be FHIR based. So we will not use it as interoperability. It's more even like that now that if we integrate into other systems, we have to make interoperability into their infrastructure. So everything what we do will be based on FHIR. And the other one is that we will use, I'm not sure, Cloud Foundry, if you heard about that, right? So that is an open source PaaS. SAP has an instance of that. All of our applications will be based on this SAP Cloud platform. One problem if you have now such a huge customer base in many, many countries is that how you get layering, how you get extensibility in, right? So we have customers who have 10,000 modifications in one system, right? How we can enable customers to, when we go now in the cloud, to achieve still the same flexibility, right? So, and in every country, for example, they have own accounting rules, which very, very deviating from country to country. How we enable this in a smooth way and also make use of FHIR, right? So, and we have these 5 layers. That would be the basic path layer. We have a layer that will be more generic FHIR functionality, where you can any kind of application build. Then the application layer comes, which really brings them, this is a patient accounting, that is a clinical information system. And on top, people should be able to say, okay, now I'm doing a patient accounting for Germany version of the product. And as well, there are some clinics or some customers who have 100 clinics in their chain, right? So they want to, again, have own developers who want to make customizing. How can we achieve that in a cloud-fashioned way, right? So that the customers doesn't interfere each other. Where we have investigated, right? So all these technical areas we have to enable, right? So that people can change the data model, changing the catalogs, terminologies and stuff like that, how they express business rules, how they express workflows and all these kind of things, right? So we have learned, for example, in Germany, normally you first get the healthcare service and then you pay the bill. In China, is it you first pay the bill before you get the healthcare service, and all these kind of things we have to be able to build in our software. What means enterprise readiness now, right? So in SAP, that's very simple. We have product standards, right? So these are hundreds of requirements and check marks where we say, okay, if you want to ship a product worldwide, then your product has to fulfill all these different aspects, for sure, for healthcare, especially important security, but also a lot of other things, right? Like software lifecycle. We have to take care that if we update our software, that we doesn't break something at the customer, that we doesn't break the partner extensions, right? Because they're relying that the foundation works. Globalization, that we can make the translation in multiple language possible. Functional localization, so that we respect the laws in the different countries, and so on. Right, if you want to know more about them, just come to me. Right, so, but usually in SAP also it's a must what you have to do, but it's not that it endless have fence, but it helps to get to the standards. What is now what we do to achieve enterprise-ready FHIR? Right, and that's, we have 2 directions what we do. On the one side, as normal SAP doesn't know about FHIR, we have to go to our technology stack and to see how we can enable the different layers of our technology that they can speak FHIR. Maybe some of you have visited the OpenUI5 FHIR course, right? So that is a general strategy. What we would have is to say, okay, how can we get there that our UIs directly speaks FHIR, so that you make it much easier to develop UIs. This is one also what we have open sourced, right? So you can now use the SAP UI component library, which directly speaks FHIR. And for all the other elements, like FHIR to Zapana, that is our own database technology, how we can map this, how can we build express business rules using FHIR. So there we are on the side that we have to improve our technology stack. On the other side is how, when we take a look on the things what FHIR is all defined, and it's quite a good set already, how we have to use these different technologies and parts of the standards to make enterprise-ready FHIR. Some of these topics I will talk about now in the next minutes. Right, for FHIR messaging, we had there the task so that many of the systems which are already existing, right, doesn't see so much that it's a client-server relationship, right? So the patient accounting system is not really a server of a clinical information system, right? It's not necessarily that they have really the same scope, right? So for example, a clinical system will send us an encounter. We have to create an account for that, right? So, and can we stop, for example, if something fails for us? The clinical system should not stop working if the accounting system is not there. Imagine the emergency room, right? So if the accounting system stops, it would be very stupid that you can't admit patients just because the accounting system doesn't work, right? So they have usually different FHIR profiles as well. Also within our systems, they will have different FHIR profiles. And we want to achieve loose coupling so that the systems not need to be always on both sides. That is that we say for the integration, so we will support REST for all the CRUD operation, but for our proposed integration with the system chain, what you saw above, we will define message interfaces so that people can use messaging infrastructure, what many hospitals have in place to get the data done. So therefore, what we try to achieve is that we say, okay, the system A sends simply to system B a message that a certain action has taken place, and system B can take then what they need from this information. And the burden is not so much on the sender for these elements. But very important, it's not that REST is not relevant for us. It's just that we say that is our default integration pattern. So I go faster through it because it just should show what kind of interaction patterns we will use in there for a typical use case, right? So that would be a clinical system for the basic admission task and ongoing clinical work. So mainly there will be FHIR messaging used. It will often happen, we aligned with the system that they want to know, for example, if they order now this procedure, if they can bill it later, right? It's a very important stuff that they don't do things what they would not be able to be billing. So therefore they would like to know and trigger our localized rules for the different countries during their operations. So therefore we support them to get the checks on the fly. In addition, we can ask for additional information. So there are certain regulations which say, okay, for this kind of diagnosis or for this kind of procedure, you need additional evidence that you can bill it, right? And for this extra information, we then can query the clinical system for additional elements. So therefore, we're making use of all these different kind of elements. We are working at the moment on the one side on generic events, where we say, okay, the very basic stuff like created, update, deleted, cancelled are defined per resource, and the clinical system can send these kind of activities, which could relatively easily be mapped to the REST-based patterns, right? So, but we would then examples like patient created, encounter updated. But on top of that, not generic, nobody can define them upfront, is then this higher level events like admission created, discharge created. Both would be more or less reacting on changes on the encounter, account ready for billing, and for example on the clinical system something like Manchester triage performed. Yeah, what is struggling a little bit, where in REST everything is more or less very fine defined in FHIR. There's no common mechanism like what is an admission in FHIR. There is no messaging at all defined besides the technical infrastructure. One of the big benefits why we love FHIR is that we don't internally have to discuss anymore what is a patient, right? So we just look up and then it's nice. Also with our discussion with Smirnov, for example, right? So the truth is more or less externalized. For these kind of events, we now have to start again and to define what should be in, right? And that would be only point to point. So therefore, we really hope that we get there step by step also a certain set of base messages into the FHIR standard. Re-evaluate subscription, that is, I added here now after the talk about subscription, so where I thought, well, we may take a look again there, what we can make use out of that. Profiling and extensibility, right? So why we need that, you see the complete stack and all these elements, right? So there could be an application-specific profile on, then there could be a country-specific profile for this application as well. On top, then there could be then a customer-specific profile that he has exactly additional needs for that, and how can we achieve that, and what is our profiling and extensibility strategy so far, purely FHIR. You saw all the other areas with business rules and stuff like that, they come in parallel, but for sure, there we discussed within SAP about this, how to do that. It has less to do with the FHIR mechanisms. What we have figured out, right? So the first attempt is for sure, we take a look if there are local or national profiles available, and we always make them as our base profiles for our application, right? So unfortunately, it was not really possible in the way that our applications always will have already specific needs, because that is why it's a specific application. So an accounting application is something different than an administration application. So, and if we would say, now this is a basic stuff from the country's versions, it has not really figured out how to do it. Let's also say there will be no SAP health patient overall, thank you, for the profile, but we would say, okay, please, application, you can define your profiles. Where we are working on that, we are sharing extensions so that the tools can communicate on these levels. So, what's that? No, that's too many animations in the stuff. Right, so these are now, there's I think one more. How now one example how different applications can use it so far, right? So some applications decided now that they say, okay, but in my patient admin, I would like to have already, for example, German and Austrian, the international address information together, because many of our use cases are, example, on borders between European countries, right? And they need addresses from both, and there is no clear distinction, is it a German or an Austrian patient? So therefore, they have to bring this together. Others say, okay, no, we do the more correct, no, not correct way, the mechanism that we say, okay, for each of the country, we have own derived patients available. Internal discussions, that was quite interesting. There was 2 bad practices, what Lloyd said in his architecture track, and we hit 2 of them already, what we have used in our discussion. So minimum profiling, right? So there's a discussion in our architecture community. If we say, okay, things what we don't need, we set to cardinality 0, because from our security point of view, we are responsible for all data what we get. We have to bring it in audit log. And if we don't know what this data is about, we can't flag it as security relevant, we can't validate it and things like that. So therefore, from the security perspective, people are very, very careful. From the openness perspective, it's for sure not so easy, because otherwise the client would have always to know in detail what he can send us and what is not. Right, so we have to see how it's there. Not so much for the extensibility, but profiles as projections. Right, so again, from the security perspective, there's no way that the server can say, from this user, from this patient can only see the address and, for example, not the gender, not the marital status. So there's no mechanism in FHIR to express these kind of filters on the server side, so that we can define that. There was a proposal in Zulip to define something like profiles as projections, right? And that is something what we are investigating, if that would help us solving this problem, that we can say, in this role, the user can only see this profile. Tooling for partners and customers, right? We have to see, we are working there with FHIR, right, to see if we can use there the tooling and integrate the tooling from Forge and Simplifier into our environment, right? So at least for the expert user, right, so the key user would most likely use an integrated work mechanism. I think instead of going too much in the FHIR translation topic, right, why we need translation, right, that is current number of versions and languages what we are supporting in our product, right? So, and it could be on instance level that the product has to be support, for example, in Switzerland, you have to support in a hospital multiple languages in parallel, right? And we have to bring this in, and we hadn't that translation so far as a first-class citizen in FHIR, right? And we have to see how we can deal with that we can get this first on our own structures, but secondly also into the overall workflow. I think I'm nearly done from time, maybe 1 minute. If you have a question, then maybe instead of going deeper, if there is a question. Yes?
You mentioned that all your internal logic will be communicated with FHIR, right? So does this mean that you need to train every developer in FHIR, and their developer needs to have a deep understanding of FHIR?
To who? Sorry?
Every developer.
Yes, but that is really where our developers are looking forward, right? Usually, right, so half of the part is discussing what is a data model, right? And you seldomly find a so good documented data model internally as it is now in FHIR, if we are honest, right? So, and usually the good documentation, what you get from our APIs, is a little bit after work. Here we can now say this is available for sure. How we make now the specific profiles, that will be, again, doing this. But it takes us a lot of time from discussions in SAP that we say we're using these mechanisms of FHIR there. So, and yeah, our developers are the main lovers of FHIR, right? So there is really no resistance in the developer community about FHIR. Thank you. Yep, that was my part. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone. I'm Pavel Smirnov. I'm the CEO of the company called Health Samurai. And today I will speak about adding FHIR interfaces to legacy systems. But first I want to share, why someone want to add FHIR Facade, FHIR interfaces to legacy systems. This is a picture from just a week ago. I went to South Texas. I don't know if anybody actually heard about the name of the city called Harlingen, or Harlingen, like very, very small area in Texas. But they have Health Information Exchange, Rio Grande Valley HIE, and very innovative HIE, like small one. Again, there are like 3 HIE in Texas, and they're probably the smallest. They cover maybe 2 million of lives in this area, but they decided to build FHIR API for the HIE. And what we have done for them, we built this FHIR API for them, and they organized a hackathon. And so they invited people from hospitals, insurance companies, just engineers from the area to come to the hackathon and work on the problems this area has. So they had stakeholders like from hospitals, from insurance companies, from ambulance company to pitch certain problems they have. And developers, like I was there, like worked 3 days in a row, like days and nights, like they built solid prototypes, have shown solutions, and they continue developing right now, like after hackathon is done, right? So I think it's pretty cool, right? So development community got really involved. Like I live in the United States, and we have app stores, built by these large HR vendors, which, right? And you come to a hospital, like I'm not speaking about like Boston, like some hospitals like really forward-looking, like which started like Smart on FHIR, for instance. I'm speaking about like regular hospital. You come to the hospital, there is no Smart on FHIR apps there, right? And you can read like the new CMS and ONC rule and the problems, the barriers which are trying to be addressed. So I think this is a good proof actually. If you open API and you make it accessible, you don't like put some amazing barriers like in terms of financial and other stuff, allow developers to work, they will. And that's a good example. Again, small HIE, very poor area and amazing traction. So anyway, that's kind of inspirational thing for me. I hope for you as well. So the reasons why you want to add API Facade to your healthcare application is, like I put 3 of them, but basically you might want to extend your system, you might want to work with third-party applications, you might want to share data, and that's why you add API, right? And you add FHIR API because you don't want, after you add API, also to do some work on translation, interpretation. It might be expensive. So if you add FHIR API, this API will be understood by everyone. So that's the right way to do. And there are 2 ways how you can create this facade. And I attended like pretty much all the sessions about API facades at the FHIR DevDays. I understand that's not the only one about API facades. Mostly people have been discussing storage-less API facade when every request to API is basically passed to underlying database, underlying services of the original system. And like for instance, I think yesterday the guy from Philips, Theo Stalker, I think he was pretty much like, I don't know, out of his presentation, significant part, he was describing which parts of the FHIR specification he is implementing to provide like API, right? So certain parts like search chain parameters like are hard to implement, certain parts like not useful. But basically what happens with this approach, usually companies just implement several API endpoints, and and it works, right? But it's not like comprehensive file server. You don't implement all the specification. So good way to start, and like very visible, straightforward advantage is you have one storage for data. You don't like duplicate computing resources. A single source of truth, right? So that's good. But when can it work? I believe it's applicable mostly to very simple use cases. When you really want just to expose, let's say, observations to, like, I don't know, third-party application, and that's it. But if you really thinking about like big picture, you want to provide access like to full all types of data inside your application, maybe not as well. So here we come into a second approach to building API facade using intermediary FHIR server for storing the data. So you use a FHIR server which implements all FHIR API specification, all operations, and you have synchronization between legacy system and your FHIR server. And essentially, FHIR server takes care of all the queries, right? What are the benefits? So first of all, is performance, right? If you have all the data replicated to a FHIR server, you have full control over performance and how these queries are performed, executed. So even if it's like very complex query, like search queries, or and you have maybe several systems which your facade is covering, you still can optimize, maybe with indexes and other techniques, the database, and your performance of your FHIR server, all the queries will be on par. I mean, we have sometimes terabytes of data, and we still can achieve milliseconds for pretty much all the queries we need, right? The second advantage of this approach, actually, if you add a FHIR facade to a legacy system, sometimes you might see a situation when the applications that use this FHIR facade really put a pretty high load, very intensive set of requests towards your API, and sometimes we see that users of legacy systems start my suffering because it might affect the performance, the functioning of the legacy system itself. If you imagine like somebody that just requesting data like continuously, like thousands of requests per second from your API facade, and it all goes to the underlying system, might affect the performance and experience of just regular users which like work maybe with legacy system over some UI, etc. And the other thing is when you have a full-blown FHIR server and use it as a API facade, it's really a great starting point for you to build a new ecosystem of applications in a FHIR-first manner on top of this FHIR server, right? So that's something like if you're forward-looking, if you're thinking about like maybe moving away from legacy, like just completely, like step by step, but still at the end of the day, you want like to have everything to be FHIR-based. That's how you can do this. If you have just API facade which expose a couple of REST API endpoints, it's hardly possible because I mean, you will develop applications, they need a lot of things to do, and you have, I don't know, a couple of read-only endpoints. It's not viable. With this approach, it is a solid first step, and you can build applications on top of the FHIR server. So there is a disadvantage, of course. Well, if you migrate all the data to the FHIR server, you will approximately pay twice for the computer resources, right? And there might be some synchronization issues. I mean, like you might have this complexity of like two sources of truth, and so you got to understand that. But like overall, from my perspective, I think the these advantages of this approach are overweighing the disadvantages. But I wanted to like share full picture. So this approach can be used pretty much anytime. Again, unless you really want to limit your facade with a couple of endpoints and like very simple use case, I think it is better approach. Any questions about this part? Okay, so the second thing I want to share how we do translation of data to FHIR and make a small demo. So it was mentioned by my partner Nikolai. He's our CTO, and it's called JUD, JSON Uniform Templates. That's a mechanism which we use for translating data to FHIR. It is open source declarative language which describes translation. Anybody can get to implementation of this language in Clojure on GitHub. Again, it's open source. And I want to show you an example. Actually, the language mostly was designed by Mike Lepshin, our senior engineer, technical lead in Health Samurai, and I'm sure he would present this himself, but that's lesson number one also. You really have to have a valid international passport for traveling if you want to present at the FHIR DevDays. It's not possible to cross border without passport. But anyway, so that's how we translate data. So let me actually show you the real example. So in this particular case where we provided FHIR API for HIE, the source of data was CCD documents, which they aggregated, normalized to MongoDB database. And we wrote this mapping. As you can see, what is good about JUD language, it is very readable, like pretty much anyone can understand what's going on. There is probably one small problem here with, because JSON, the order of this if and else is not perfect, and then is coming after else, because JSON data is not storing the order properly, right? But other than that, you can see that like what's going on. You can see like some if and else, and you can see here is we have actually a cycle map which goes through all allergens, and you can see how it's what fields go to what FHIR fields, and so the source looked like this. This is the source, yeah. Like also parsed to JSON and translated to YAML then, and then if we go to run it through our JUD parsing, this is the FHIR data in YAML. So that's how it works. Yeah, so this is about JUD. And I have shown the demo. We also use this translations, for instance, from HL7 v2 to FHIR, and like CSV to FHIR, and like so kind of universal language. And yeah, so this is the advantages. We have business analysts writing mappings in JUD, so it's not necessary to be hardcore engineer. We found it's relatively easy, and somebody without deep programming experience, knowledge can do this. And again, I want to say that that's totally worth doing this. Bringing FHIR API to your system, amazing things happen, and have like some more pictures from the hackathon. Like people were working, like a few groups, and presenting their applications. So this is it from me. Thank you. Questions? Any questions? Please.
So did you write JUD because FHIR mapping language was immature, or was there some particular reason you felt the need?
So a couple of things. First of all, we actually did it before FHIR mapping language appeared. So we are with FHIR since 2012, and FHIR backend, the first version of Firebase we built in 2013, and first commercial FHIR backend 2015. So that was like quite an early story for us, Jude as well. And second, we believe it's again more readable, declarative, so easier to understand. Like when I show mapping in Jude language, like for HL7 v2 of like the one I have shown to you, I think you feel what's going on there. It's very easy to read. It's also might be a matter of taste, right? So, but that's the answer. Please.
Is it bidirectional, this mapping, right? So how you could write back into the legacy system, or is it mainly now a consumption?
This is for consumption, but we also have bidirectional mapping, a little bit different approach. Like we use it for X12, like to FHIR. Any other questions? Well, if no more questions, I think we're ready for the end keynote, right? And thank you for coming and listening to me.